Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Pastor's Bible Study, Season 2. We're very excited to have y'all joining us this semester for our study of Ecclesiastes. For those of you who are new to this, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. One of them is that we have a chat function on the side of the screen, and you can use that for any observations you have, or if we bring up something that you actually know a lot about, you can add your commentary in there. If you have a question for the panelists, you can use the Q&A function. That's a separate button at the bottom of your screen. And our moderator will bring up those questions as they become relevant throughout the lesson or at the end when we have 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how long we talk, for questions. So feel free to submit those questions at any point, just as you think of them. I want to say hello to all of you who are watching in real time right now, who are all of you who are dialed in and you can hear us. We love you. I'm waving, but you can't see me. But we're glad you're here. And also, hello, welcome to all of the people who will be watching this in the future. So we're glad to know that these Bible studies have been helpful for group study or further learning throughout the week and not just on Wednesday nights. So thank you all for joining us. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious God, author of all wisdom, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together, to share your word, to learn, to see what you have to say to us. We ask your blessing on this time and on the material that we will be processing through today. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Kate. It is our tradition tradition now. It's the second time we've done it, so it's a tradition. But we always like to start the first session of the Pastor's Bible Study by introducing all of the pastors who will be participating this semester. So if our other panelist teacher pastors can show up on the screen, I'll just go clockwise on my screen to introduce folks. First, we have the Reverend Dr. Bill Kerley, Reverend Paul Richards-Kuan, Reverend Kate Flint, and I am Reverend Karyn Richards-Kuan. Our moderator, the voice from above today, is Reverend Dr. Jeff McDonald. So we are very, very thankful for the participation of all of these pastors and the many different viewpoints and voices and discussions that each one of us bring. So to start our series, I wanted to ask all of the pastors participating, why Ecclesiastes and why do we need to study it now? So Pastor Bill, I've never called you that. Bill, if you'd like to start.
Well, that's a great question. And I want to encourage people, if they're going to participate in this Bible study, to read the book of Ecclesiastes. It doesn't take that long to do. And if you want to get a friendly paraphrase of it, you can get Eugene Peterson's message and read it. That's a good one to do. So here we have an ancient Israelite seeking to find the meaning of life. And there are a lot of people who will tell you that the book of Ecclesiastes is maybe the weirdest, oddest book in the Bible. But it is one that reflects the human desire to find meaning in life. And I think that one of the things that is really uppermost in our culture need right now is to examine our lives and examine our lives in our current culture, seeking to find meaning. And those of you who have heard me more than once know I'm really big on emphasizing having a daily spiritual practice. And one of the things that I recommend as part of that practice is a book by Jim Hollis called Living the Examined Life. So if you read the book of Ecclesiastes kind of in one hand and Jim Hollis in the other hand, you will see an ancient Israelite and a contemporary white Western male American trying to answer the same questions about what does it mean to live an examined life. And I think it's very important for us to deal with the questions and the observations that the author of Ecclesiastes puts out there for us to reflect on. Very relevant. By the way, I'm using this book. It's a commentary written by William Brown. It's kind of my source book for finding out more about this book. Is that enough?
Thank you so much. I think, Paul, are you up next? Or was it Kate? I think it was Paul.
Well, to answer the question of why Ecclesiastes, I think Bill said a little bit about it being the oddest book. I think kind of to build on that idea of being the oddest book, I would say it's the most normal book, and every other book of the Bible is odd. Karl Barth talks about the Bible being the strange world of the Bible. You know, like I feel like when you first read the Bible, even as a kid, or if you're exposed to it as an adult, like weird stuff happens and it becomes so normal to be like, and the Holy Spirit drops down and fire rains down. And, you know, God appears in a whirlwind or whatever, like stuff's happening. And it's like, you're hit with one crazy thing after another that you don't see in your regular everyday life. And then here comes Kerley, the author of this book. And he's like, oh man, isn't work terrible? It's toilsome toil. You know, and it's like, hey, I got to work every day. You know, I can relate to that. Like it's, to me, this book. So I will say, maybe it's weird of me, Bill, Ecclesiastes is my favorite book of the Bible. I mean, I always do like an annual reading of Ecclesiastes at least, because to me, it so speaks to that desire to understand life. And I think why now is Ecclesiastes is written at a time of deep change in Hebrew society, Hellenization period that's happening. And to an extent, he's holding back and kind of casting off two different traditions, both the wisdom tradition and the prophetic tradition that he inherited, although he definitely takes a lot of that with him, but he's pushing back on a lot of their ideas while also kind of saying, you know, all of the people who are like futurists that are trying to look for the newfangled thing that'll save us, like that's also not where you need to put your hope. So I think at a time, this is an evergreen idea, I think, but I think, you know, we can point to that now. We can point to kind of segments of our society that want us to go back to something, anything, right? I mean, lots of different people, they want to go back to a thing. And Kerley would say, no, there's no hope in the past. We can't dwell in whatever was. But then, you know, maybe a Silicon Valley kind of type hope for the future where we can build the next big thing that'll change how society. He's like, no, that's not going to be our hope either. So he's his commentary and way of looking at where hope is might seem hopeless, but to me, to me, it's a sober analysis. So my conversation partner during this journey is Elsa Kamez. Her book, When the Horizons Close. She is a Mexican theologian, liberationist kind of bent, and Methodist. They have a different denomination in Mexico that's affiliated with United Methodist Church, but an intriguing read so far. I'm excited to have her inform our journey.
Oh, that's me. All right. So I have studied Ecclesiastes some. I've read it. It's been more mysterious to me than some of the more concrete books. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to study it this year, to really dig into it and kind of make more sense of it. And in that seeking meaning, seeking sense, you run into a lot of the teacher in this text doing the same and seeking meaning. And I remember a long time ago when I did a Bible overview course at my church, we got to this point and I said, okay, guys, this week we're doing Ecclesiastes, so that's kind of a bummer. And one of the members of the group said, are you kidding? This is the best one. It shows how nothing in your life gives you purpose without God, that you can't find the meaning of life in food or hanging out with people or in even your job, but God gives you purpose. This participation in something that is bigger than you is the purpose. And that really enlightened this whole book for me, to look at, rather than it just being like, why bother, that it gives it a different look at how somebody would find their purpose. So I will be working primarily with a brand new compilation of essays called Reading Ecclesiastes from Asia and Pacifica. And it is edited by Gian Havia and Peter H.W. Lau, but it has contributors from China, Pakistan, India, Australian Samoa, Malaysia, Oceania, and Palestine. And so the broad spectrum of Asia and what all the different, not all certainly, but many of the different voices there and what they bring to this context. And one of the things the editors wrote in their introduction to this book draws from Ecclesiastes and why we come back to texts like this that are so ancient. Why don't we just, say, it's an enigma from the past. We don't really need to focus on that. So why do readers from different parts of the world return again and again to the same texts? It's because we have something to gain from our toils. Indeed, we return to the texts that others have read before because we're not satisfied. We are restless and we expect to gain something from reading or toiling for ourselves. And so that is my hope for this study, that we would all gain something from this very ancient text that we have over the years returned to over and over again.
Thank you. I shouldn't have saved myself for last because I feel like there isn't so much to add on top of what you all have already mentioned, but just in terms of the purpose of the pastor's Bible study, our goal is to really be able to dive into books of the Bible that as a congregation, we might not be as readily exposed to, or we may have a certain opinion based off of one or two encounters of such a book, or one or two encounters of people who have taught those books in a way that was either very appreciated or not. To be able to dive into this kind of book and explore it with all sorts of different viewpoints and through different theologies and lenses and contexts. And much like Revelation, I find that Ecclesiastes is this kind of book. Ecclesiastes is in this section within the canon called the Five Scrolls. And the Five Scrolls are some of the most underrepresented books within the Revised Common Lectionary. I mean, of the total 5 books, I think that they appear in the lectionary maybe half a dozen times in a 3-year cycle, between half a dozen and a dozen times. So they're basically not there and very underrepresented. So for a lectionary church like St. Paul's, it's really important to make sure that we get to fill these books in where we have the opportunity, because you probably won't hear a sermon on it, given that we only have the opportunity to do so once every 3 years. And there are so many other wonderful texts that vie for our attention. So that's one reason why I think that it is really wonderful that the St. Paul's community gets to study Ecclesiastes right now. And the other The other reason I think it's really critical to study Ecclesiastes now really echoes what Bill said. We are living through a time of really intense introspection as a nation and as a community. And so to have the opportunity to really diligently examine our lives, our toil, our motivations, and our humanity, to be able to work these muscles, I think is invaluable at this time. And I hope that our study together will help us to thrive as we figure out, discern, and move toward the future together as a community. So that is, oh, I forgot to say, my primary conversation partner is CL, and this is actually just the Anchor Yale Bible translation and commentary. The scholar who produced this particular volume of the commentary is a Singaporean American Old Testament scholar out of Princeton. So that will be my primary conversation partner amongst others. So thank you, Paul and Bill, for dropping in to share that with us. Today, Pastor Kate and I will be leading us through this first 11 verses of Ecclesiastes. And we intentionally picked a very, very short segment of the book to cover because there's a lot to cover just to even enter into Ecclesiastes together with you. And the first 11 verses are meaty and really set the tone. So we will first start by just discussing the different contexts that we find ourselves in, both our context as readers now and what we mean by that and the differences between contexts, but also Ecclesiastes context within the canon as a whole, and Ecclesiastes context within history. Then we will move toward the actual verses that we have for today, which are verses 1 through 11. If you haven't been able to read them yet, we will have the opportunity to read them together since it is such a short section. And we'll focus especially on this theme of Havel, and we'll explain that when we get to it. So that is our general path forward for our lesson today. And then as Kate said earlier, the last 10 or 15 minutes will be question and answer time, but you're welcome to write questions in the chat, or in the Q&A function at any point when we're talking, just as you think of them, and we'll address them at the end. So Kate, do you want to start us off with context?
So there are a number of different ways of looking at context, and within contextual criticism, two main ways to look. First would be looking at the biblical context, what it meant then, who wrote it, when, where, and what were they responding to in that moment. And that can be tremendously helpful in understanding some of the nuance of the language, in bringing meaning to it. It can also have the downside of, if you're comparing that to a different country, a different time, there can be a tendency to privilege the scripture's original context over a new one. The scripture's context is the default, the automatically right, and others are not, which used wrong, you can have sort of a colonizing effect of, what you're doing is wrong, let's go back to this. And so you have to be careful as you're weighing, okay, that's different from us, or that's different from where we're reading this now. What's right or wrong is maybe not the best way to approach that. But it can really illuminate what where the text is coming from. Differently, you can look at the text in your context. Where are you right now? What lived experiences do you bring? If I'm reading we are more than conquerors through Jesus Christ our Lord. If I'm in a dominant culture, me being a conqueror means something very different than Paul writing that to the underground church. And so, but how has that been used? What does it mean to me to be a conqueror? What, for better or for worse, what has been done with that? And so it's really interesting to bring the scriptures into a new country, a new language, new time, and use a different lens to look at them.
So within all of those different interactions of context, which we'll go over more in a moment, there are tons of different ways to understand Ecclesiastes. It's very easy to read the first few verses and think you really have a good grasp of the scope of the book and what it really isn't, which is, uplifting and hopeful. But this is not actually the case. There are so many different ways that folks of faith on whose shoulders we stand, older scholars, the ancient folks, so many different ways to understand Ecclesiastes. And so understanding context can help us to parse out these many different theologies and readings. Some say that the author of Ecclesiastes is utterly pessimistic. Others find the author to be thoroughly optimistic. Some find the book to be a skeptical one that's pretty devoid of faith. But as some of our other pastors shared, you can also interact and interpret this as one that's incredibly pious. So there are a lot of different ways to understand this based on the different contexts and the different translations that we're working with. So I shared a little bit about the context within the canon just a moment ago, but just to sort of reiterate that Ecclesiastes is the kind of book that we say is at the very edge of the canon. And I don't mean that it's on the ends like Genesis and Revelation as we have our scriptural canon today, but I mean that it was nearly edged out several times. Councils of old, particularly, I think one of the first councils mentioned is the Jamnia Council. They asked questions like, does this book have integrity? Is it coherent? Is it faithful? And there were a lot of differing opinions on this. Different compilations, different canons included this and didn't include this, but it did make it into the scriptural canon that we have today and that guides our faith today. As I mentioned, it's a part of the 5 scrolls. So the 5 scrolls are Esther, Ruth, Song of Songs, Lamentation, and Ecclesiastes. And these are an incredible grouping of scripture that I have deep fondness for, and that I'm really excited to look at a little bit deeper with you all. Pastor Kate, did you have a word to add about the context of Ecclesiastes within the canon?
Sure. And where it falls depends on which Bible you're reading. If you're looking at the Hebrew Bible, which is our Old Testament, it's in a little bit of a different order. And the Hebrew Bible is referred to also as the Tanakh, which is an anagram for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, which is the Pentateuch, our first 5 books of the Bible. And then you have the prophets, Nevi'im, and then Ketuvim are the writings which come last. And that includes some of the histories along with the scrolls that Karyn was talking about. And so if you look at that flip-flop there, both the Christian Bible and the Hebrew Bible would put the Torah first. But then we have the writings as kind of interlude between our old history and then the prophets, which come at the end of our Old Testament, looking directly into the beginning of the New Testament, where the answer to the prophets shows up. But in the Hebrew Bible, it's organized differently. And so you have the Torah, and then all the prophets coming through. And after that, the wisdom literature and the histories and the writings, which I don't know if that emphasizes or de-emphasizes the importance of it, depending on how you look at it. But I thought that was an interesting switch. So you would find this closer to the end of the Hebrew Bible.
So that brings us to the context of Ecclesiastes within history. When was this written? Who by? What were they concerned about at the time? All of this will help us parse out Ecclesiastes. Kate, did you want to give us sort of a lay of the historical land? I'll talk about where a lot of scholars think that this is time, but I think it's helpful for everyone to know sort of the timeline of what we're working with.
Sure. Two pretty big landmarks here are Solomon, which is the traditional source of most of the wisdom literature, and the exile. So where those would fall in our timeline, Solomon is going to be 10th century BCE. The exile is obviously the period of Babylonian captivity that began in 597 BCE when Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians, and then the return to Jerusalem in 538 BCE when the Jews were given permission to return. And so you have that there in the 500s. This comes a little bit later. So we're looking at the 400s probably for this. So it's reflecting on the immeasurable cultural impact of being scattered, losing their home, and being able to return to it is where we find this being compiled, as opposed to being written during the United Monarchy under King Solomon.
So the book has been dated anywhere from 10th century BCE to the 1st century. And the 10th century obviously coming from this claim of Solomonic authorship or influence. And it's pretty clear for a lot of different reasons that this is not actually Solomon. And some of the things that we know about this both are from some of the focuses of the book and also just some of the language, which is something that's really easy to parse out and figure out. On the basis of language, the book really cannot have been written earlier than the 5th century. So definitely not Solomon. And we get this from the fact that there are a couple what are called Persian loan words. So there are a couple words that we find in Ecclesiastes that would not have existed in this way before the 5th century. It's like if Shakespeare invented a word and we know the timing for that invention of that word in some play that he published, and then some other rando is writing something and it uses that word, even if we don't know the timing of when the rando's writing happened, we know that it is after Shakespeare's writing. So this is the same kind of thing with the presence of the two Persian loan words. We also find a number of economic and legal terms that are really at home in the socioeconomic world of the Persian Empire right around the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. So this is most commonly dated to this post-exilic period that Pastor Kate was describing to us just now. Now, the language of the book doesn't actually reflect standard Hebrew literature of the post-exilic period, which has been cause of some confusion and some doubt for whether it should be placed there. But the commentator that I am working with said that really it's just sort of like a literary deposit of what would have been common vernacular, specifically just the everyday language of the Persian period. So it's not your writing voice. It's as if you just spoke something in the marketplace to a friend and someone else wrote it down. One of the other ways that we both know a little bit more about where this book is in the grand scheme of history, as well as one of the things that we learn from where this book is in the grand scheme of history is the focus on money. Ecclesiastes reflects a monetary and commercial economy, an environment which is actually very, very different than the largely subsistence agrarian culture of what we see in pre-exilic Judah. So one of the most important features of this post-exilic time is the really prominent role of money. The government at the time instituted a really efficient system for taxation throughout the empire. And so to facilitate both trade and efficient payment of taxes, the government began to mint coins and began to standardize currency. And it's not that money was unknown in earlier periods, but this introduction of the coinage by the Persians really democratized the usage of money and transformed the economy. So a lot of the epigraphic materials of this time, this included, have a real concern with money. So Ecclesiastes is written to an urban audience that is deeply concerned with economic matters. And as we read through Ecclesiastes together, we'll see a lot of different parts of the book where the author tends to both borrow and use the vocabulary of their day to make their point and to subvert the preoccupations of their contemporaries, mainly the concern with money. And it's important to note as we're sort of going through this financial piece that the author has to offer to us, the people that the author speaks to, we can assume are both socially and economically sort of in the middle. They're not mentioned as the nobles or the wealthy, but they're also not really portrayed as the poor. So real sort of middle-class folks who are both able to take care or to take advantage of opportunity, but also subject to the whims and risks of what was a pretty volatile economy. So that is a little bit more about the setting and the context of Ecclesiastes within this historic period that will really guide our reading as we continue through.
So something that we'll be looking at here, and as you do any sort of scriptural work, you want to think about how we talk about scripture, the examples we use, the analogies, what norms do we assume are biblical, what are the proper biblical norms. I think of, a phrase, we casually use, back in Bible times. Well, that could be a lot of different times. And the geography is not the same. You picture like a sand dune and a single palm tree. That's not the only backdrop that we're reading scripture in. And so there's just a lot more to what we're looking at when we're dealing with scripture. We also want to point out that scripture, or all text, just all text, is a response to something. No text falls from the sky. We were discussing earlier that would be easier if it just did. But that this text comes from somewhere, in a real time and place, and responding to something that came before it. Something that Bill found in William Brown's commentary that he's reading is there's an idea that the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the things that this epic story is responding to. And so if the audience at the time would have known the story of Gilgamesh and the journey for purpose, then this response to that would have extra layers of meaning as our main character goes on a search for purpose. And we also want to think about one of the ways it's been described that no text is an island. Even that assumption makes sense if you romanticize an island that's all by itself and actually doesn't match up with actual island life. And so our Pacific Islander authors in the commentary I'm reading were saying, maybe don't use that if you don't actually know the interconnectedness of island life. It doesn't mean what you think it means. And so they would suggest saying no text is network free, or no text is self-satisfying, or something along those lines, that indicates that it's all interconnected with the culture and the literature and everything at the time.
All right, I think that cues us up nicely to actually get into the meat of what we are here to talk through. So I'm going to read these, I'm juggling books. I'm going to read these first 11 verses, and I'm going to read them out of this commentary and translation by Robert Alter. You can follow along in whichever translation you have in front of you. These are the words of Kohelet, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Merest breath, said Kohelet, merest breath. All is mere breath. What gain is there for man in all his toil, that he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth endures forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and to its place it glides. There it rises. It goes to the south and swings round the north. Round and round goes the wind, and on its rounds, the wind returns. All the rivers go to the sea, and the sea is not full. To the place that rivers go, there they return to go. All things are weary. A man cannot speak. The eye is not sated with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which was is that which will be, and that which was done is that which will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. There is a thing of which one would say, see this, it is new. It already has been in the eons that were before us. There is no remembrance of the first things, nor of the last things that will be. They will have no remembrance with those who will be in the latter time. One of the things that we want to spend considerable time on is this first part of the second verse. And depending on the translation you're using, the words that I read are probably different than how your translator chose to translate this Hebrew word. And the word in question is havel. In the Hebrew, I should say, it's havel. Havel is often translated as vanity. So you may find in your translation that the second verse says vanity of vanities. All is vanity, something along those lines. Havel, as it turns out, cannot actually be translated. There's not one single translation from the Hebrew to the English that really captures the essence of the word. This presents somewhat of a challenge to us as readers of Ecclesiastes because of the 73 times it appears in the Hebrew Bible. Havel comes up 38 times in these small 12 chapters in Ecclesiastes. So figuring out what the author means when the author references Havel is a significant thing for our understanding of Ecclesiastes. The literal meaning of Havel would be like air or vapor or breath, as the translator that I read translated it, a whiff, a puff, or even steam. It refers to anything that is superficial or ephemeral, anything that is both insubstantial, incomprehensible, enigmatic, or even inconsistent and contradictory. Something that is Havel can't be grasped or controlled both physically or intellectually. So within the Hebrew Bible, Havel is very often used as a metaphor for something that is ephemeral or insubstantial, much like the human lifespan. And this is one of the ways that it's often translated in Ecclesiastes. Every translation, though, is a choice, and it makes a huge difference in our understanding whether we take our understanding of the word vanity and put it here where Kohelet is speaking. It completely reframes our understanding of this entire text. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time just sharing some of the different translations of Havel, particularly because it does come up so many times. And because we are all reading translations, I'm assuming, unless someone is working with the Hebrew text, let us know if you are, and we can just pop you on here and sub one of us out. Since we are working with translations for the most part, we won't know when Havel comes up. As teachers will try to bring it up as often as possible, but 38 times is kind of a lot of different times. So as we read through Ecclesiastes, we'll want to pay special attention to the times when the author is referencing something that is not graspable, that is vanity, that is breath, that is air. Pastor Kate, do you have anything to add to the breathlessness that
yes.
is Havel?
Some of the other explanations for what Havel means, coming from Thomas's commentary, it could mean a big mess. So verse 2 would say, a big mess, says the teacher, a big mess. Everything is messed up. Could also be rubbish, garbage, something worthless, an immense emptiness, or such as the emptiness in a stomach when you're hungry. And so, there's a lot that it could be. And the choices on how we select the word that we're going to use in each translator would choose is unavoidably ideological and political. What message are they trying to convey on purpose, or what assumptions are leaking in through the lens that they're using that they're not even aware of? They just assume that's the way things are. No text is free of context or is completely innocent or is, and no reading is free of any additional meaning or of adding meaning to the text. Anytime you read something, you're adding layers of meaning. But while we're on the subject of meaning, I thought we don't have in our outline here, but there's a word that Paul used early on, Kohelet, that we didn't talk about. And I really tried to get us to list ourselves as Kohelet 1, 2, 3, and 4 on here. That didn't catch on. That's a word. Let's see if I can spell it without looking at it.
Kate, that's a great place to be, because that was one of our questions, was if that we had heard Paul mention that, and we need a little more explanation on that. So yay, go.
Yay. Thank you. Yes. So Qoheleth. I feel like I'm in a spelling bee, which was not my strong suit. Is that right? Kohelet. That's the narrator. That's the word in verse 1. It says, the words of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, teacher has, in my translation, there's a little note there. It says, or could be preacher, could be assembler, one who gathers. But that word is a label or a name we can use for our narrator, our author, who, as we discussed a little bit earlier, is probably not a son of David, king in Jerusalem, but is placing themselves within that tradition, following Solomon, which gives a little credibility to the authority to speak with wisdom, and placing themselves in the wisdom literature tradition. And so that's where we get that word choice. And so depending on which one did your translation use, Karyn?
The translation that I read, wait, what am I looking at? The translation that I read said Kohelet.
Oh, okay.
But one of the commentaries I'm working with does have preference to a gatherer. and not as much the teacher preacher, well, not as much the preacher, but definitely the teacher aspect, whether it's a teacher in public. The commentary I'm working with assumes that Kohelet, as we will call them, is probably a gatherer or collector, whether of wisdom, wealth, or people, remains to be seen, but most likely a teacher in the wisdom tradition, like you said. And Kohelet is the Hebrew title of the book, so it's not just random. We get, I find this funny, we get to Ecclesiastes because Ecclesiastes is the Latinized form of the Greek translation of the Hebrew word. So if you take Kohelet and translate it into Greek and make that Latinized, you get Ecclesiastes. It's very straightforward and makes a lot of logical sense. So that's, you'll find us using Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, the gatherer, all talking about whomever this author is. So thank you so much for that question.
When you're looking for scholarly work on Ecclesiastes, often you don't find it, but there's plenty of stuff on Kohelet.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I was looking for. Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, let's look into our next section. So that kind of talks about verses 1 through 3, vanity or meaningless, whatever. And what do people gain from toil? Then we get into a discussion of the natural world and this cycle of the way the natural world works. Generation comes and generation goes, but the earth remains. The sun rises, the sun goes down, and then it hurries around to the place where it rises again. And obviously this is using an understanding of the cosmos where, you know, we're in one place and the sun goes around us. But the wind blows to the south and it goes around to the north. And so talking about the sea and the wind and the streams and all of these cycles that come and go and ultimately balance each other out, which one of the translations for this word, Havel, that I learned in school was balance. And it's not one that we came across in much that we looked at recently. So I really need to track my professor down and ask where he got this idea. But if you look at meaningless, like zero, and when you zero something out, it's balanced. I think that's how you get there. And so looking at the world as ultimately balanced, you know, you can go up, you can go down, ultimately it levels out. You know, the sun rises, the sun sets, the tide goes out, the tide comes in, it all balances out. That takes a much less hopeless tone and a more, to me, comforting tone. That no matter where we're going, things will ultimately balance. And so that's some of the ideas coming out of this middle section in our text.
And I think you really can get there. When Pastor Kate and I were first discussing what we were going to cover, and she brought up this balance piece, I thought, like, that has nothing to do with anything. How could they have gotten to that? But the more we talked about it, if you look at this first section, verse 3 is this rhetorical question that sort of serves as the thesis statement of the preface, that human beings have no advantage in all of their toil under the sun. And then what follows in verses 4 through 8 is a poem that really demonstrates the thesis, this balance, this zero sum, this recurring event of nature. And it's a poem that makes the point that there is a lot of activity in the universe, in nature, but no advantage per se is gained and nothing new really happens. So I think that if you look at this section in terms of the preface, which is the first 2 verses, and then this thesis, this rhetorical thesis as the 3rd verse, and then verses 4 through 8 as a poem that really supports the 3rd verse, I think you can understand this as talking about balance.
One of my commentators suggested that there could be a view that this, and we'll talk a lot more about this as we go on, does this negate the theology of cause and effect that had been taught? If you do this, then this will happen. And this is saying it's not what you, what you do is ultimately meaningless. And from the perspective of the teacher, that could mean his actions have no consequences. From the point of view of a bottom rung of the social ladder worker, that could mean I work really hard and gain nothing. And so depending on where you're reading this from, that balance or that ultimate vanity or of the systems that you can't affect could be good news or bad news. But at least you could hear your own experience in this. Like, sometimes you have experience working really hard and wondering, what am I doing this for?
Absolutely. The commentary that I am working with moves us along to verses 9 through 11. And the commentator says that while Kohelet appears to be talking about the predictability of events, so the sun rising, the sun setting, the wind moving to the north and to the south, even as the author had been speaking about this real predictability of the nature's routines, the author is in fact speaking of the impossibility of knowing what will happen despite all the appearance of routine. And I wanted to mention this because this is a theme that will come back to you over and over again. Sometimes it's when the author is borrowing that language that I mentioned previously, borrowing the language of his contemporaries to be able to prove a point. So there are several instances in Ecclesiastes where it appears that the author is making a statement about something, but in reality is borrowing this language to try to make a point about commerce, about toil, about advantage. So we'll come back to this several times as we continue to dive into the book together. And I think the last thing, because we're nearly out of time already, the last thing that we wanted to touch on is related to that, just of the nature of history repeating itself, and whether this first 11 verses, particularly the last couple, are pessimism or a philosophical warning. Kate, did you want to talk a little bit about the history piece of that?
Yeah. So if you look at verses 10 and 11, it says, is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been in the ages before us. The people of long ago are not remembered, nor will there be any remembrance of people yet to come by those who come after them. And the idea is we think we've invented something new. And if we aren't aware, we aren't remembering what has come before us, we can think we've come up with a new thing, but it's come around before. And one commentator reminded us that if we don't learn from our history or remember our history, we can repeat it. And the purpose of learning about the people long remembered is to prevent us from making the same mistakes, which this author might say are just going to keep repeating because you aren't learning from the past. So I thought that was a very interesting point to think about for us now. Why is it worth looking back at patterns and comparing them to where we are now?
Well, in our last 6 minutes, do we have any questions to answer, moderator? One
thing, if you all could do is, and I see Bill has left, but if Karyn and Kate and Paul, if y'all could just say a word again about your commentaries, just list those again so we know what you're using.
Yeah, and one thing we can also do for those who are more visual and want to actually look these up, we can list these at the bottom of the web page for the Pastor's Bible Study, which is just stpaulshouston.org/study. So we can make sure to list some of the main works we're working with. But the major work that I'm pulling from is this Ecclesiastes translation and commentary. It's the Anchor Yale Bible commentary. I always mix up the order of those words. And C.L. Xiao is a Singaporean American who, at the time of this book's publishing, was the Old Testament professor at Princeton Theological Seminary. And then one of the other translations and commentaries I'm using is the Robert Alter translation of the Hebrew Bible. And this is a fresh commentary and translation, which is not to say that he got rid of all the archaic sounding words, but it was just published. So it's a very exciting compilation for all of the Hebrew Bible nerds in your life.
So I'm working from, like I said, a very new work, so new that I'm reading it as a PDF, called Reading Ecclesiastes from Asia and Pacifica. And Havia and Lau are the editors, but there are a dozen or so authors of the different articles in that compilation.
Yeah, that was published just this past year. Well, published, it was finished just this past year by the Society for Biblical Literature. So we're really excited to get to have it.
Yeah. Another one I'm drawing from is Feminist Interpretations of the Hebrew Bible in Retrospect. And so that's, they didn't have a lot to say about this one, but I'll get into a little bit more in later weeks. What else I pulled from there.
And then Bill is using the Ecclesiastes commentary. It's not a translation, it's just the commentary. It's a part of the interpretation series, which is one of my favorite series to start sermon research with. If I ever just need a really quick lay of the land look at a passage in scripture, I often turn to interpretation first, and then I go from there in my study. So his commentary is written by William P. Brown, who's a really well-respected Ecclesiastes or wisdom literature and Ecclesiastes as well scholar. And then Paul is using a commentary called When the Horizons Close, Rereading Ecclesiastes, and that's by Elsa Tamez. So that's what we're working with. And there are several other books that we're pulling from. I mean, I have just a stack hiding under my laptop. These two are also books that I have really liked using for more of an overview thematic understanding of Ecclesiastes, just to help us along as we move through, but they're less verse by verse. So you'll hear them referenced pretty sporadically. And there are some other books that are just scattered around all our desks that we'll be pulling from as well.
So Karyn, you'll have all those on the webpage, though, all those references,
yes.
And maybe even a link to Kate's PDF if we wanted to go to that.
I think so. I need to double check with my source for that PDF that we're allowed to share it. Yeah. It was sent to me as a link in an email, so I just need to double check with my professor to make sure it's like public.
Sure. And is there anything specific you would have us prepare for our time together next week?
Yes, there is a calendar on that same webpage. There's a little square calendar with all of the different scripture sort of pre-assignments for the coming weeks. And actually, I can pull that up really quickly to tell you what those are for next week, because I don't have that memorized. So next week we'll be talking about the sage, the partier, and the laborer. And we'll be starting right where we left off on verse 12 of the first chapter, and we'll go all the way to the end of chapter 2, which gets you to verse 26. So it's still a brief section. All of the reading for this semester will be really manageable. So you'll be able to read it a couple times if you sort of find yourself scratching your head the first time through. Any further questions?
I hope y'all are watching the Q&A as well, because there were some great comments in there too. Oh. Randy said something about vanity, and Arnie talking about Kohelet. And so just be sure y'all kind of watch through the Q&A, because some things are answered in there as well.
Yeah.
And that's it for questions for tonight.
All right, it is 7 o'clock. So let me close us in a very, very brief word of prayer. Let's pray together. Oh, Holy One, we are so grateful to get to dive into your words of wisdom for us this evening. We ask that you would give us questioning minds and open hearts as we continue our study together. We pray all of these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.